this video, we're going to talk about employee well-being. That term is just so expansive. It covers so much. So what is truly meant by that and what should we focus on? Answers to those questions are coming up now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is HR Shop Talk, and on this show we talk about all kinds of HR topics with experienced guests. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or podcast to keep learning from my guests. Today, my guest is Linda Duxbury. I think it's fair to say that Linda is Canada's leading expert on employee well-being and work-life balance. She's influenced policy, been on the 6 p.m. news, co-written national studies, and really so much more. I'm delighted to have her. Hi, Linda. How are you?
I'm great, and thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you for coming on. Okay, but let's just dive in. We are talking about well-being, and you specifically use the word well-being. So can you, define it and just let us know, is there a reason you use well-being rather than wellness?
You know, I've never been asked why I used well-being, not wellness. I'm an academic in the area, and a lot of academics use the term well-being. It seems to be more all-encompassing, wellness. You know, so as an academic, anytime I write an article and I use a term like well-being, I would say what I mean by it. So well-being, you have stressors in the environment, which puts strain on the person, which results in impacts on what I call their well-being. So when I look at well-being, I would look at stress, I would look at burnout, I would look at anxiety, depressed mood, I would look at physical health problems. So all of these things, to me, encompass well-being.
What about the impacts on the employee from things that aren't at work?
So you would look at that as well, but I'm a business school prof, and so my focus is on the job. Okay. But I do have at the center of pretty well everything that I do is the idea of work-life balance. So when you do work-life balance, that's work interferes with family and family interferes with work. So you can have predictors from both the work end and the family end. So I do look at that, but I'm more focused on work and what can the employer do to actually help the individual achieve some better kind of well-being. And it's the same with, what can the employee do themselves? But, those are the factors that I look at.
Okay. So if you look at the things that an employer has a lot of influence over.
Yes. Well, a lot of influence over people's lives. That's why you focus on the business end of it.
Right. So what are those, main things that an employer can truly influence in terms of employee well-being?
Well, let's look more instead, not what can the employer influence, but what can the employer do that negatively impacts well-being? Because then once you've identified that, then you can look at what can be done about that. So I would say the first thing right now is work demands and the expectation that many employers have that you have really nothing else to do with your life except meet their demands, that you're going to be available 24/7, that you'll answer emails, that you'll, if need be, you'll extend your day to work evenings, weekends, etc. So a lot of my research focuses on a concept called role overload, which is having too much to do in the amount of time that you've got to do it in, feeling rushed, feeling stressed, feeling, what am I going to do? Now, we look at both overload from the work domain and overload from the family domain. And when you say, well, why are you focusing on work? Because it's all about work, stupid. Not saying you're stupid, but that's what it is. The expectations put on people by their job are way outweigh the expectations put on them by their family domain. And it becomes all consuming. You've only got 24 hours in the day. You've only got so much energy. Most people are spending 8, 9, 10 hours in work. They're spending 5, 6, 7, 8. We'd like the higher end, but many people are spending 5, 6 hours in sleep. That doesn't leave a lot of time for everything else. So it's fitting everything in around work and expectations about work that are problematic. What else do organizations do? A lot of them have quite toxic organizational cultures. We call them greedy organizations, in that they expect you to be there for them all the time. And so if we look at those kinds of things, what could employers do? Well, they could have enough staff that everybody's not having to work 24/7. They can, and here's a concept, they can bring back secretarial and admin support. So if I look at workload, one of the big drivers of it is you're doing your own typing now, you're doing your own photocopying, you're doing all your answering. We've gotten, you've got that email. So you're constantly doing a lot of the administrative work that used to be done by somebody else. We really need to lower the workload levels.
I mean, I've just sort of lived in this my whole life. Are employers out there doing this differently, where they are tasking their employees with a reasonable workload? And what does that, in the end, impact does that have on their bottom line?
Well, it's interesting because that's why you study it from the business perspective. What I quickly discovered when I first started work in this area, I really thought if you showed that people were unhappy with their work and they were stressed and having problems, an employer would go, well, geez, why didn't I, thank you for telling me, I'm going to get right on that and fix that. But what I quickly found is most employers either A, don't change for moral reasons, or B, they talk about how wonderful they are, but the reality on the ground is quite different. So I try to make the business case by showing how stressed, a stressed out workforce who's completely overwhelmed by all they have to do, how that negatively impacts productivity, recruitment, retention, EAP use, prescription drug use, presenteeism, the need to come to work even though you shouldn't be there. So there is the business case to be made, but it's quite interesting because the pandemic is going to drive change. So prior to the pandemic, my data said that the typical professional in Canada devoted 21 hours a month of additional unpaid work to their employer. Evenings, weekends, just getting it done. And now what's happening after the pandemic? Well, the pandemic, our data says a lot of people have reevaluated their life, reevaluated their balance, reevaluated what's important to them. It really made a lot of people in touch with the fact that they were spending their time in life in a way that wasn't making them happy. And so now we're seeing this thing called quiet quitting, and everybody's like, employers are, oh my goodness, look what's happening. And what's really happening is people are saying, you told me how much you value me. You told me how much balance is important and how you're going to focus on it, but I don't feel the love. So I'm going to work what I'm paid to work. And I'm going to have a life now outside of work. So this is a pretty big sea change, actually.
So you were talking about stressed out employees and the impact on, I don't know if you used the words, the impact on the bottom line, but, correlated with business. Okay, with business goals. What have you seen there when so yes, they're working longer hours, but are they more productive? I've heard popular stuff say they're not more productive. I sometimes have a hard time believing that.
Oh, hours at work is a lousy measure of productivity.
Okay.
So the way to think about hours of work, it's a curvilinear, sorry to be academic, but a curvilinear relationship means it goes up it plateaus and then it starts to go down. So at the lower end, if you're only working 5, 10, 15, 20 hours a week, the more you're working, the more productivity you have, because the more time you have to get something done. Then we've got a plateau period, but then above us, and you're going to ask me, well, what is that time? And I would say, well, we don't know when the down curve starts, because it depends on what else you have to do with your time. Okay. Mm-hmm. If it was just work, that was all you were doing, we could probably figure out the number. But if you've got childcare, elder care, you got a partner, hey, God forbid you've got hobbies and you want to sleep, then in fact, you've got the more demands on your time, the sooner that down curve happens. Because, everybody who's watching this, I would say, have you ever, stayed up really late to get something done? And then you got up the next morning, and quite frankly, you're not working on all cylinders. Your neural synapses are not as effective. Every hour sleep we miss is equivalent in terms of cognitive functioning to having an alcoholic drink. So if we're constantly working longer hours, our concentration wanes. Our ability to come up with creative, innovative ideas also declines. So you talk to people who are procrastinators and they go, oh, I work so much better under pressure. Well, no, actually, research would say you might think you do, but you don't, because the more pressure we're under, the more mistakes we make, and the more we have to go back and fix those mistakes, which takes away from productivity. So it's a very complicated equation. But what I would say is no employer should be focusing on hours as a measure of productivity.
If you found this informative, subscribe to see all the episodes and comment. What has been your focus within this incredibly broad area of employee well-being, and why did you choose that focus? Let us know in the comment section. Okay, so you might not be looking at LinkedIn and other social media, but do you see myths, hear about myths or misconceptions people have about employee well-being?
I see employers often thinking that it's something employees should be doing for themselves. Oh. I think I see a lot of stuff out there talking about nutrition and exercise and sleep. Yeah, those focus on wellness. Okay, those make you physically well, perhaps mentally well, but well-being is a bigger constellation to me. And quite frankly, a lot of people know that a good diet matters, that in fact sleep matters. But when you're overwhelmed, you're overloaded, you don't have enough time to do everything that you want to do, and you're stressed. Well, nothing like celery doesn't help you cope with stress. Chocolate cake and ice cream do. So, there's all of these things out there. But I actually refuse to go in and talk to employers who want me to talk about what their employees can do to become more resilient. I refuse, because I say, it's a partnership here, and many of the problems that these people are having is because of actions and you're taking or expectations you have in terms of their time, deliverables, urgency, etc. So we need to focus on both. I'm not going to give anybody a talk on, well, get more sleep and go out for a walk and be in nature. People know this. It's time that is the enemy of it, good intentions. Sorry, I get very excited.
You should get excited. Okay, so I'm going to be honest with you. I really always did see, the employee, the individual, and a little bit it's me as really responsible for their own well-being. You're putting more responsibility on the employer than honestly I thought you might have. Where is that balance?
Oh,
between the
no.
employer and the employee?
So the employee needs an income, right?
Yes.
Especially if they have responsibilities beyond themselves. So they have to put food on the table, pay for a mortgage, etc. In exchange for that income, they give time, energy, effort to an employer. However, the employer puts constraints on, when their availability for other roles, their ability to balance other roles. And in many cases, and not in all cases, but there are good employers out there.
Yes.
But there are, and there are good pockets. There are good managers. And if you've got a good manager and you're listening to this right now, they're gold, and thank them for it. But the reality is that many organizations, they don't directly say, but they hint, well, if you can't do this, we can. Job security is an issue, worrying about promotion, pride in our own work. And so there are constraints that the employer puts on our ability to cope. And sometimes the only way actually to get wellness is to quit your job. If you're in a toxic work environment, a toxic culture, like you work for yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You work for yourself. So if you're toxic, that's on you.
Yes.
But a lot of people don't work for themselves. They work for somebody else. And that somebody else dictates when meetings are held. That somebody else dictates where they work, when they work, the amount of flexibility, all the things that have to be done. So no, I don't. I do put some responsibility I put a lot of responsibility on the employer, actually. Mm-hmm. A good employer is worth their weight in gold, and a bad employer is very bad for what I would call your well-being. When I go speak at conferences, I actually feel my role is to hold a mirror up and speak truth to power, because a lot of their own employees can't say what I'm about to say.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so, coming out of the pandemic, what is the current state? And I know you've done pandemic research because I've seen
a lot of pandemic research, yeah.
So what is the current state of employee well-being as we move out of the pandemic?
Well, people, again, want, an answer. And I say, because I am an academic, it depends on context. Okay. So
I love that, though. That is the full picture. I don't want the pat answers.
Yeah,
so this is great.
This is the answer about well-being. So it really depends. Did you work at home, or were you an essential worker? Do you have kids? Was your partner also at home? What sector are you working in? So right now, healthcare, education, well-being is horrible. Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've got data on healthcare providers. I've never seen worse data in terms of the levels of stress, job stress, burnout. It's really difficult. People who were single and who lived at home and worked remotely during the pandemic, they lost a lot of social context, social support networks, and that was very damaging to them. People who worked from home during the pandemic and who had children, while they were under stress, they also got to experience time with their family that they wouldn't have had otherwise. Self-employed, depending on what your sector was and what you're doing podcasts, you probably could do that during the pandemic. But other people who were conference organizers, they had a much more difficult time. So it really depends a lot. Did you I've talked to people who lost their jobs during the pandemic. A lot of people did, and now they're coming back in. I mean, it's very, very difficult. If I were to extrapolate, though, we have data on 36,000 Canadians. The stress levels are higher than I've ever seen. The balance levels, work-life balance, is down, which is interesting because people who work from home, they go, oh, well, I was just so much more productive. No, the amount of time they spent in working went up. Evenings, weekends, morning, early morning, late night. So it went up. And productivity is the amount done per unit time. So productivity didn't go up. The one thing I would be able to generalize about is coming out of the pandemic, people are cranky, grumpy, stressed. So as an academic, we look at emotions as positive, negative, active, passive. People are active negative emotions. They're frustrated, they're angry, they're worried. Very few positive emotions. And the problem with that is emotions are kind of a filter through which we take in all the perceptual cues from outside. So if you're grumpy and cranky and in a bad mood, you interpret the world kind of through that way, as opposed to if you're happy. So people right now are glass half empty people, not glass half full people, and they're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. The pandemic has gone on longer than most people's ability to cope, and most people's concept of how long it was going to go on for. So, frustration, I would say, that's a systemic thing going through the workforce. But everything else, well-being, really depends a lot on other things. Have you got a strong social network? What's your own personality like? Can you say no? Can you, so if I look at myself, I implemented a whole bunch of strategies during the pandemic because, hey, I researched this area and I went, maybe I should stop telling other people what to do and do it myself. So now I stop. I used to work most evenings. Now I stop at 9:00. Husband and I watch a streaming show. Then we read. It's now I stop working a lot earlier than I did. So but I still work hard, but I put in different things to try to get more joy out of life besides my work, which I love.
Okay. Final closing question here. What advice do you have for employers as they put their organization-specific playbooks into effect?
So, as won't come as a surprise to you, I have many pieces of advice because, again, it depends on context, okay? Yeah. So, first of all, we are over-focused on the people who were able to work remotely during the pandemic. That was about 40% of the Canadian workforce. We are but they're grabbing all the media attention. Yes, they're sucking the energy. Oh, what are we going to do? Hybrid, back to work. And we've got the nurses, the teachers, the retail clerks, who went, hey, you spoiled little puppies. I had to show up all the time. And now you're demanding this and demanding that. How about me? So my first piece of advice is don't ignore your essential workers in your over-focus on return to work for those who went home. Okay. That's number one. Number two, this is a very complicated issue. It's much more complicated to manage a hybrid workforce than a workforce that's all at home or all in the office. So don't just do these knee-jerk solutions. So many employers are like, well, you all have to come in 1 day a week. Well, that's ridiculous. And no wonder employees are going, well, that doesn't seem right. You have to actually look at the work being done. And you have to create a continuum. You have to look at the tasks people are doing. And you have to say, can these tasks be done remotely? Or do they require collaboration, social presence, relationship building, creativity, all the things we know we need communication-rich media for. You look at the work objectively without looking at the person, then layer in the person on top of it. If the person wants 4 or 5 days at home, but their job doesn't lend itself to that, then you have to say to them, I'm sorry, you did it this way, but it wasn't ideal. This is what your job demands. If you want to work more time at home than this job will allow, then you have to get a different job. And then the other thing is, don't just say, come in for a day a week. And so people come in, they put their work clothes on, they pay for gas, they pay for parking, they put makeup on, they do all that stuff. They get in there and they're the only person there. So they have all the hassles of going in, but none of the perks, right? And then they go in and they spend all their time on Zoom calls with people who aren't there. So schedule at work time, at the workplace time differently, make it worth people's while to come in. Don't, recognize the dimensions of the job, recognize the skill set and the preferences of your people, and don't just take it the easy way one day. That doesn't make sense to anybody.
Thanks, Linda. That was so informative and valuable. I did an episode on organization design, and my guest, Len Nanjad, is motivated by employee well-being and the work he does. Check that out here. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.